Most of the civil rulers of Christ's day, probably all of them, including Pilate, had difficulty understanding a spiritual kingdom as contrasted with an earthly kingdom. Pilate unquestionably thought the kingdom Jesus came to establish would usurp the authority of the Roman Empire. Well, Jesus told Pilate in John 18, verses 36 and 37, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence." Pilate therefore said to him, "Art thou a king then?" And Jesus answered, "Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice." The people of the Roman Empire, including many Jews, had trouble understanding how a kingdom which Christ came to establish would not in any way rival Caesar's kingdom. At least it needed not do so. Many of Christ's contemporaries probably thought that Christ's followers would give their allegiance to Christ and have no respect for the laws of the land. But that was not God's plan for his children then, and it's not his plan for his children today. Peter commanded the early Christians in 1 Peter 2 verses 13 through 15 to submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, and with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So this begs the question, what is the will of God? Well, who can question the emphasis that Peter makes here? Obeying the laws of the land when they are not in conflict with God's law. This is the will of God. If the non-Christians expected God's people to rebel against every law which was enacted, they were sorely mistaken. Instead, the early Christians and Christians in every age have been and are to be the best citizens of any country. When Christians had to disobey the laws of any nation, and they have been obligated to do so, that sometimes has been taken the wrong way. When they had to disobey the laws of any nation, and they have been obligated to do so, it's not because they're being evil-spirited, it's not because they're being difficult, but it's because they are being committed to the will of God above their allegiance to any human institution. Christians are said to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, Matthew 5 verses 13 through 16. And friends, we cannot be salt and light when we oppose governmental regulations just because we may not like them. We must have conscientious reasons for not obeying the government. When Christians were obedient to the laws of the land, and they have been most of the time during this Christian age, by their good works they put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, 1 Peter 2:15. Well-doing in this context and elsewhere must be defined by God's standards, not by human standards. Our respect for law and our obedience to it stop up the mouths of the critics. The word silence in our context means literally to put a muzzle upon. The same word is rendered speechless in Matthew 22 and verse 12. When outsiders know that Christians observe legitimate laws of the land, their objections to Christian behavior lose their punch. They no longer make sense when they criticize Christians. And our generation of unbelieving critics need to listen carefully to what Peter says about Christians obeying the laws of our nation. The expression ignorance of foolish men refers to a type of ignorance which we would call willful ignorance. Many of the church's most persistent and bitter enemies actually knew the devotion of the early Christians to obeying human ordinances, but they hoped to make them believe the Christians were rebellious and stubborn people. They wanted to make the lives of Christians as miserable as they knew how. And tragically, not all such enemies of the cross are dead, but we still see these types of critics in the world around us today. But let us as Christians never give them any room for calling us breakers of the law. Friends, we thank you for joining us for our program today, and have a blessed day.